I opened the envelope with my morning coffee, expecting maybe a coupon or some junk mail, but instead found a letter from the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association informing me that they had placed a lien on my property for $7,000 in unpaid fines. My hand froze halfway to my mouth. I had never received a single fine from these people, not once in the 3 years I had owned my house in this suburban Phoenix neighborhood. The letter was signed by Patricia Holloway, the HOA president, and it detailed a litany of supposed violations dating back 18 months. Apparently, I had failed to maintain my lawn to community standards, painted my mailbox an unauthorized color, and parked a commercial vehicle in my driveway overnight. None of these things had actually happened. My lawn was immaculate because I paid a service to handle it twice a month. My mailbox was the same boring beige it had been since I moved in, and I drove a Honda Civic, not exactly what anyone would call a commercial vehicle. I set my coffee down and read the letter 3 more times, each read making me angrier than the last. The lien meant that if I tried to sell my house or refinance my mortgage, this $7,000 claim would have to be satisfied first. It was like someone had just reached into my bank account and frozen a chunk of my net worth based on complete fiction. I called the HOA office immediately. The phone rang 6 times before a bored-sounding woman answered. Meadowbrook Heights, HOA, this is Sandra. Hi, my name is Frank Thompson. I just received a notice that you placed a lien on my property at 4827 Desert Bloom Drive. I need to speak with someone about this right away because the violations listed never happened. Hold, please. She put me on hold before I could say another word. Elevator music played for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes. This is Patricia Holloway. The voice that came on the line was sharp and clipped, like she was already irritated before even hearing what I had to say. Miss Holloway, I'm Frank Thompson. I received your letter about a lien on my property. There must be some kind of mistake because I have never received any notices about violations, and the violations you listed never actually occurred. Mr. Thompson, our records are quite thorough. If we issued a lien, it means you failed to respond to multiple notices and failed to pay assessed fines. But I never got any notices, not a single one. And my lawn is professionally maintained, my mailbox has never been painted, and I drive a regular car. Are you calling me a liar, Mr. Thompson? Her voice went up an octave, taking on that particular tone that immediately made me think of every difficult customer service interaction I had ever witnessed. No, I'm saying there has been an error. Can you send me copies of the notices you claim to have sent? We are not required to provide you with anything beyond what we have already sent. The lien is valid and will remain in place until you pay the full amount owed plus administrative fees. Good day. She hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand, stunned. I had just been dismissed like a misbehaving child. This woman had apparently decided that I was guilty without any opportunity to defend myself, or even see the evidence against me. My next call was to my buddy Marcus, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. He listened to my story and let out a low whistle. Man, that sounds like fraud. You need to talk to an attorney who specializes in HOA law. I know a guy, Robert Chen. He has torn HOA boards apart before. Let me text you his number. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Robert Chen's office in downtown Phoenix, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Robert was in his early 40s, wearing a crisp suit, and he listened to my story while taking notes on a legal pad. "Do you have the letter?" he asked. I handed it over. He read it carefully, his expression growing more interested with each line. "This is very sloppy work," he said finally. "They filed a lien without providing you with proper notice, which violates Arizona law. HOAs are required to follow specific procedures before they can place a lien on a property. They have to send you notice of violations, give you an opportunity to cure those violations, hold a hearing if you dispute the fines, and only then can they assess penalties. None of that appears to have happened. So what do I do?" We fight back. "Hard. I will need to do some investigation, but based on what you are telling me, this HOA has committed several violations of state law. I am thinking we file a motion to release the lien immediately, and then we hit them with counterclaims. I am seeing potential claims for slander of title, violation of the Arizona Planned Communities Act, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of fair debt collection practices. 6 counterclaims, at least. Possibly more depending on what we find. The question is whether you want to pursue this. It will not be cheap, and it will take time." I thought about Patricia Holloway's dismissive tone on the phone, the way she had treated me like I was the problem when I was the victim here. I thought about the lien sitting on my property, damaging my credit and my ability to manage my own finances. Let's do it. All of it. Robert smiled for the first time since I had walked into his office. "Good. I will need a retainer of $5,000 to get started. And Mr. Thompson, I want you to document everything from this point forward. Every interaction with the HOA, every piece of mail, every phone call. We are going to build an airtight case." I wrote the check, which hurt given that I was already out the psychological cost of this bogus lien. But something told me Robert Chen was worth every penny. Over the next week, Robert's team went to work. They requested copies of all HOA board meeting minutes for the past 2 years, all correspondence sent to my address, and all records related to the alleged violations. The HOA dragged their feet, but Robert filed a motion to compel discovery, and suddenly documents started arriving. What those documents revealed was stunning. There was no record of any notices being sent to my address, no photographs of alleged violations, no board meeting minutes discussing my property. In fact, my address was not mentioned anywhere in any HOA document until the lien was filed. But it got worse. Robert's investigator, a former police detective named Mike, started digging into Patricia Holloway's background and her tenure as HOA president. He discovered that, over the past 2 years, the Meadowbrook Heights HOA had filed liens against 17 other properties in the neighborhood. In every case, the liens were for violations that were either minor or questionable, and in every case, the homeowners had paid the fines rather than fight the HOA. "This is a pattern," Robert explained during our meeting a week and a half after I had first hired him. "Patricia Holloway is using the HOA as a personal piggy bank. She files bogus liens, homeowners get scared and pay up, and that money goes into the HOA account, which she controls. I am willing to bet that if we audit the HOA finances, we will find some very interesting discrepancies. You think she is stealing? I think she is running a shakedown operation, and I think we are going to prove it." Robert filed our response in Maricopa County Superior Court. The motion to release the lien ran 23 pages and laid out in meticulous detail every way the HOA had violated state law and its own governing documents. The 6 counterclaims added another 40 pages of legal firepower. The HOA had 30 days to respond. They responded in 28 with a motion to dismiss that was clearly written by someone who had Googled how to respond to a lawsuit and cobbled together some boilerplate language. Robert laughed when he read it. They hired a bargain basement attorney. This is going to be easier than I thought. The first hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late June. The Phoenix heat was already oppressive, the kind of dry heat that makes you feel like you are walking through an oven. I met Robert outside the courthouse at 8:30. "Remember, let me do the talking," he said. "The judge will likely ask you some questions, but keep your answers short and factual." We walked through security and made our way to the courtroom. Patricia Holloway was already there, sitting at the defendant's table with a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who I assumed was her attorney. This was the first time I had seen Patricia in person. She was exactly what I had imagined. A woman in her late 50s with blonde highlights, too much makeup, and an expression that suggested she was perpetually smelling something unpleasant. She glared at me as I sat down. I did not react. Judge Maria Gonzalez entered and we all stood. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had a reputation, according to Robert, for not tolerating games in her courtroom. "Please be seated. I have reviewed both motions. Let's start with the plaintiff's motion to release the lien. Mr. Chen, you have the floor." Robert stood and launched into a clear, concise explanation of why the lien was invalid. He cited specific sections of Arizona law, referenced the HOA's own bylaws, and walked the judge through the complete lack of documentation supporting the alleged violations. "Your Honor, the defendant HOA cannot produce a single piece of evidence that my client was ever notified of any violation. They cannot produce photographs of the alleged violations. They cannot produce board meeting minutes discussing these violations. What they did produce was a lien, filed without due process, that has damaged my client's property rights and credit." The HOA's attorney, who introduced himself as Gerald Pemberton, stammered through a response about how the HOA had the right to enforce its covenants and conditions. He kept shuffling papers and losing his place. Judge Gonzalez cut him off. "Mr. Pemberton, I am less interested in the HOA's general enforcement rights and more interested in the specific procedures followed in this case. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Thompson was provided proper notice before this lien was filed?" "Your Honor, the HOA has standard procedures for sending notices." "That is not what I asked. Do you have proof that notices were sent to Mr. Thompson?" Pemberton looked at Patricia, who whispered something to him. "Your Honor, we would need to verify our records." In other words, no. The motion to release the lien is granted. The defendant HOA will remove the lien from Mr. Thompson's property within 5 business days. Now, let's discuss these counterclaims. Mr. Pemberton, your motion to dismiss is frankly insufficient. You have provided no substantive legal basis for dismissal. The counterclaims will proceed. We will set a schedule for discovery and further motions. My clerk will coordinate dates with both counsel. Patricia Holloway's face had gone bright red. She started to stand up, but Pemberton put a hand on her arm. They had a whispered argument that was audible enough for me to catch phrases like incompetent and told you this was serious. We left the courtroom victorious. The lien would be removed and our counterclaims were moving forward, but Robert was not celebrating yet. "This is just round 1, he said. "Now the real work begins. We need to depose Patricia Holloway, depose other board members, and we need to get access to the HOA's financial records. I want to know where every dollar has gone for the past 3 years. Over the next 2 months, discovery was a battle. The HOA fought every document request, every interrogatory, every deposition notice. Robert had to file 3 separate motions to compel, and each time Judge Gonzalez grew more irritated with the HOA's obstruction. Finally, in late August, we got what we were looking for. A forensic accountant that Robert had hired, a meticulous woman named Dr. Sarah Winters, finished her analysis of the HOA financial records that had been turned over. "Mr. Thompson, you need to see this," Robert said over the phone. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" I left work early and drove downtown. Robert and Dr. Winters were waiting in the conference room, which was covered in spreadsheets and financial documents. "Tell him what you found," Robert said. Dr. Winters adjusted her glasses. "Over the past 3 years, approximately $84,000 has been diverted from the HOA General Fund through fraudulent invoices and unauthorized transfers. The money was funneled through a shell company called Desert Property Services, which is registered to Patricia Holloway's husband, Kenneth Holloway. She stole $84,000. Yes, and the pattern correlates directly with the bogus liens. She would file a lien. The homeowner would pay, and within days, Desert Property Services would submit an invoice for landscape maintenance or security services that were never actually performed. The HOA would pay the invoice, and the money would end up in the Holloway's personal accounts." Robert was already on his phone. "I am calling the Maricopa County Attorney's office. This is not just a civil matter anymore. This is criminal fraud, embezzlement, and probably racketeering." Things moved quickly after that. The county attorney assigned a prosecutor named Jennifer Walsh to investigate. She was a sharp woman in her 30s who had built her reputation on white-collar crime cases. "She met with us," reviewed Dr. Winters's report, and agreed that there was sufficient evidence to open a criminal investigation. 2 weeks later, Detective Ray Martinez from the Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit showed up at Patricia Holloway's house with a warrant. I was not there, of course, but Robert heard about it from Jennifer Walsh, who heard about it from the detective. Patricia was arrested and charged with 18 counts of fraud, 6 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of racketeering. Her husband Kenneth was charged as an accomplice. The local news covered the story, and suddenly Meadowbrook Heights HOA was infamous. The other homeowners who had paid bogus fines started coming forward. Robert connected them with other attorneys, and within a month, there were 12 separate lawsuits filed against the HOA. The organization was essentially defunct, unable to function with its president in jail and its finances under criminal investigation. Patricia Holloway's criminal trial was scheduled for the following March, but our civil case proceeded on its own track. In October, Robert filed a motion for summary judgment on our counterclaims. The evidence was overwhelming. The HOA had violated state law, breached its fiduciary duty, committed fraud, and caused me significant emotional distress and financial harm. The hearing on the motion was perfunctory. Gerald Pemberton barely mounted a defense. The HOA had hired new counsel at this point, a more competent attorney named Elizabeth Grant, but even she could not overcome the mountain of evidence Robert had assembled. Judge Gonzalez granted summary judgment on all 6 counterclaims. The only question remaining was damages. The damages hearing was scheduled for early November. Robert prepared meticulously, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about the harm to my credit, the stress and anxiety I had suffered, and the punitive nature of the HOA's conduct. I took the stand and described the emotional roller coaster of the past 6 months, the fear I had felt when I first received the Lien notice, the frustration of being dismissed by Patricia Holloway, the anger at discovering that I had been targeted in what was essentially an organized crime operation run through a homeowners association. "Mr. Thompson, how has this experience affected your daily life?" Robert asked. I stopped sleeping well. I was constantly worried about my house, my finances, my credit score. I felt violated, like someone had broken into my life and trashed it for no reason. And the worst part was feeling powerless, like this HOA could just do whatever they wanted and I had no recourse. But you did fight back. Yes, because someone had to. If I had just paid the $7,000, Patricia Holloway would have moved on to the next victim. Maybe she would have hit someone who could not afford to fight back, someone who would have lost their home because of her greed. The HOA's new attorney put up a weak defense, arguing that the HOA as an organization should not be held responsible for Patricia Holloway's criminal actions. Judge Gonzalez did not buy it. The HOA board had a fiduciary duty to oversee the president's actions, she said from the bench. The evidence shows that multiple board members either knew or should have known about these fraudulent liens. The organization is absolutely liable. 3 weeks later, Judge Gonzalez issued her ruling on damages. She awarded me $35,000 in compensatory damages and $150,000 in punitive damages. Additionally, the HOA was ordered to pay my attorney's fees, which by this point had climbed to $68,000. The total judgment against the Meadowbrook Heights HOA was $253,000. The HOA did not have that kind of money, not after Patricia Holloway had looted the accounts. Elizabeth Grant, the new HOA attorney, approached Robert about settlement. The HOA will have to dissolve, she explained at a meeting in Robert's office. There are not enough assets to cover the judgments from all the lawsuits. We are proposing a structured settlement where Mr. Thompson receives a payment plan over 5 years, secured by a lien against the HOA's only remaining asset, which is a small community center. Robert looked at me. It is up to you. We can force them into bankruptcy, but you might end up with less money if we go that route. Or we can take the structured settlement and at least guarantee you will be made whole eventually. I thought about it. What happens to the other homeowners who were victims? They will be part of the same settlement pool. Everyone who was defrauded gets paid. Then let's do the settlement. I want to make sure everyone gets compensated, not just me. The settlement was finalized in December. I would receive monthly payments for 5 years with interest. The other victims would receive their proportional shares. It was not perfect, but it was justice of a sort. Patricia Holloway's criminal trial happened the following March, just as the desert was starting to heat up again. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery and watching as prosecutors laid out the full scope of her fraud. The evidence was damning. Emails between Patricia and her husband discussing how to hide the money. Bank records showing transfers from Desert Property Services to their personal accounts. Testimony from other homeowners who had been victimized. Patricia took the stand in her own defense, which her attorney later admitted was a mistake. She claimed she had been trying to protect property values in the neighborhood, that the fines were legitimate, and that any money that ended up in her accounts was payment for legitimate services. The prosecutor, Jennifer Walsh, destroyed her on cross-examination. Miss Holloway, you testified that Desert Property Services provided landscape maintenance to the community. Is that correct? Yes. Can you name a single employee of Desert Property Services other than yourself or your husband? Patricia hesitated. We contracted out the actual work. To whom? Various contractors. Can you provide the names of these contractors? I would have to check my records. Miss Holloway, you have had months to prepare for this trial. You have had access to all your records. You cannot name a single contractor that Desert Property Services allegedly hired. Patricia's face flushed. I do not remember off the top of my head. Jennifer Walsh pulled out a document. I am showing you what has been marked as Exhibit 47. This is a bank statement for Desert Property Services, showing deposits from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA totaling $84,000 over 3 years. Can you show me a single corresponding payment from Desert Property Services to any contractor or vendor for landscape maintenance? Patricia stared at the document. Those payments might have been in cash. $84,000 in cash payments over 3 years, with no records, no receipts, no documentation of any kind. I did not keep detailed records. Or Miss Holloway, Desert Property Services never provided any actual services, and you simply stole the money. Isn't that the truth? Patricia's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen through her lies. It took them 4 hours to return a verdict, guilty on all counts. Patricia Holloway was sentenced to 6 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all victims. Her husband Kenneth received 3 years for his role as an accomplice. Their assets were seized to help cover the restitution payments. I attended the sentencing hearing. When Judge Randall, the criminal court judge handling the case, asked if any victims wanted to make a statement, I stood up. "Your Honor, may I speak? Please, Mr. Thompson." I walked to the podium. Patricia Holloway would not look at me. When I first received that Lien notice, I thought it was a mistake. I thought that if I just explained the situation to someone reasonable, it would be cleared up. What I found instead was a predator who had taken advantage of the trust that homeowners place in their HOA. Patricia Holloway did not just steal money. She stole people's sense of security in their own homes. She made us feel powerless and afraid. But she made a mistake when she targeted me because I had the resources to fight back. I hope this sentence sends a message that no one is above the law, not even an HOA president who thinks she is untouchable. Judge Randall nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Miss Holloway, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Patricia finally looked up. Her makeup was smudged, and she looked 10 years older than when I had first seen her in court. "I just wanted to keep the neighborhood nice," she said quietly. "By stealing from your neighbors," Judge Randall's voice was sharp. "By filing fraudulent liens and pocketing the money, Miss Holloway, you betrayed a position of trust, and you did it for personal gain. That is one of the worst forms of theft because it undermines the very concept of community. 6 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections. Restitution in the amount of $84,000 to be paid to the victims. Bailiff, please remand the defendant." Patricia was led away in handcuffs. Her husband Kenneth, who had been sentenced earlier in the day, was already on his way to prison. I left the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in over a year. It was not just about the money, although the settlement payments would certainly help recoup my legal expenses. It was about the principle. Patricia Holloway had tried to bully me into paying for violations I never committed, and instead, she ended up in prison. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA officially dissolved 6 months after Patricia's sentencing. The neighborhood transitioned to a voluntary neighborhood association with no enforcement powers, just a social organization that planned community events and maintained common areas through voluntary dues. Most homeowners seemed relieved. The era of aggressive HOA enforcement was over. Robert Chen and I stayed in touch. He sent me a bottle of expensive whiskey when the final settlement payment cleared, along with a note that said, "Thanks for letting me take down a fraud artist. These cases are why I went to law school." I kept the whiskey but shared it with Marcus, whose referral had started this whole journey. We sat on my back patio one evening in late October, sipping whiskey and watching the sun set over the Phoenix skyline. "You ever regret fighting them?" Marcus asked. "Not for a second." $7,000 might not seem like a lot to some people, but it was the principle. She was a thief and a bully, and she needed to be stopped. You think other HOAs will learn from this? Some will. Some will not. But at least in this neighborhood, people know they do not have to just accept whatever the HOA tells them. They have rights and they can fight back. Marcus raised his glass. To fighting back. To fighting back, I echoed. We clinked glasses and drank. The whiskey was smooth, expensive, and tasted like victory. My house was finally, truly mine again, free from bogus liens and fraudulent fines. The nightmare was over, and Patricia Holloway was exactly where she belonged, behind bars, paying for her crimes. In the months that followed, I became something of a neighborhood celebrity. Other homeowners would stop me at the grocery store or at the gas station to thank me for exposing Patricia's fraud. A few of them had received their settlement payments and were able to recoup the money they had paid under duress. One elderly couple, the Martins, who lived 3 streets over, told me they had almost lost their house because they could not afford to pay the $5,000 fine Patricia had assessed them for painting their front door the wrong shade of tan. "We were going to sell, Mrs. Martin said, tears in her eyes. "We have lived here for 20 years, but we were going to sell rather than deal with that woman. Thank you for standing up to her." Stories like that made every dollar I had spent on legal fees worth it. I had not just fought for myself. I had fought for an entire community that had been held hostage by a corrupt HOA president. The local media picked up the story, and I did a few interviews with Phoenix television stations and newspapers. I tried to focus the message on the importance of homeowners knowing their rights and not being afraid to challenge HOA overreach. Several state legislators even reached out, saying they were considering new laws to prevent this type of abuse in the future. One state representative, a woman named Deanna Foster, invited me to testify at a committee hearing about proposed HOA reform legislation. I took a day off work and drove to the state capitol in downtown Phoenix. The hearing room was packed with homeowners who had their own horror stories about HOA abuse. I listened to tales of fines for children's toys left in yards, threats of foreclosure over minor paint color violations, and boards that operated with zero transparency or accountability. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. HOAs can serve a valuable purpose in maintaining property values and creating community standards, but without proper oversight and clear legal protections for homeowners, they can become vehicles for abuse. My case was extreme, but it was not unique. We need laws that require HOAs to follow basic due process before assessing fines, that mandate transparency in HOA finances, and that provide homeowners with accessible remedies when their rights are violated. No one should have to hire an attorney and spend thousands of dollars just to prove they did nothing wrong. The committee members asked thoughtful questions, and several expressed support for stronger regulations. Representative Foster told me afterward that she was optimistic the bill would pass. "Your case really opened people's eyes," she said. "Sometimes it takes one egregious example to spark real change." The bill did eventually pass, signed into law the following spring. It required HOAs in Arizona to provide homeowners with detailed notice of alleged violations, an opportunity for a hearing before an independent arbiter, and mandatory annual audits of HOA finances. It was not perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. Life gradually returned to normal. I kept up with my lawn maintenance, not because I was afraid of HOA fines anymore, but because I took pride in my home. I painted my front door a bold red color just because I could, a small act of defiance and freedom. Nobody could tell me what color my door should be anymore. One afternoon in late spring, about 18 months after this whole ordeal began, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello, Mr. Thompson. This is Detective Martinez from Phoenix PD Financial Crimes. We met briefly during the Holloway investigation. I remember. What can I do for you? I wanted to give you a heads up. Patricia Holloway is up for parole next month. She has served about a third of her sentence, and with good behavior, she is eligible. There will be a parole hearing, and victims have the right to submit statements or appear in person. I thought you might want to know." My first instinct was anger. 6 years had seemed like appropriate punishment for what she had done, and the idea of her getting out early felt wrong. But then I thought about it more carefully. Will she be required to continue making restitution payments? Yes, that is a condition of any parole. She would have to maintain employment and make regular payments toward the restitution order. Then, I am not going to oppose her parole. She needs to pay back what she stole, and she can't do that from prison. If she violates parole or stops making payments, she goes right back. That seems fair. That is very understanding of you, Mr. Thompson. I am not doing it for her. I am doing it because the other victims deserve to get their money back, and this is the fastest way to make that happen. Fair enough. I will note your position in the file. Take care. Patricia Holloway was granted parole 2 months later. I never saw her again. According to the public records, she got a job as a cashier at a grocery store in Mesa and made her monthly restitution payments on time. Her husband Kenneth was released around the same time and took a job in construction. They were divorced within 6 months of their release, which did not surprise anyone. The settlement payments continued to arrive like clockwork, deposited into my account on the 15th of every month. I used some of the money to make improvements to my house, things I had been putting off. New windows, a renovated kitchen, desert landscaping in the backyard. Each improvement felt like a reclamation of my home, making it truly mine in a way it had not been when I was living under the threat of HOA tyranny. I also donated some of the money to a nonprofit organization that provided legal assistance to homeowners fighting HOA disputes. If my experience had taught me anything, it was that access to good legal representation was crucial, and not everyone could afford a lawyer like Robert Chen. The organization was grateful and told me the donation would help them take on several new cases. 3 years after the lien was first filed, I attended a neighborhood barbecue at the community center. The building was still owned by what remained of the old HOA, but it was now managed by the Voluntary Neighborhood Association. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, nothing like the tense, rule-obsessed environment that Patricia Holloway had created. I was flipping burgers on the grill when a younger couple approached me. They had recently moved into the neighborhood and introduced themselves as David and Holly Zimmerman. "We heard about what happened with the old HOA," Holly said. "Everyone says you are the one who took them down." I shrugged. I just stood up for myself. A lot of people contributed to exposing what was happening. "Still, it took guts," David said. "We almost did not buy here because of the HOA horror stories we heard. But then we learned the HOA was dissolved and it is just a voluntary association now. That changed everything." "I am glad it worked out," I said. "This is actually a great neighborhood when you do not have someone abusing their power." Holly leaned in conspiratorially. "Can I ask you something? How did you know to fight back instead of just paying the fine?" Most people would have just paid it to make it go away. It was a good question, and I thought about it for a moment while I flipped a burger. I think it was because I knew I had not done anything wrong. When you are genuinely innocent, paying a fine feels like admitting to something you did not do. And once I started looking into it and realized there was no evidence, no documentation, nothing but Patricia's word. I knew something was seriously wrong. At that point, it was not about the money anymore. It was about the principle. "That makes sense," David said. "Well, thanks for making this a better place to live." They wandered off to get drinks and I went back to the grill. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that were particularly vivid in the Arizona desert. Kids were playing in the grass, adults were chatting and laughing, and everything felt peaceful and right. Robert Chen showed up later in the evening, surprising me. He did not live in the neighborhood but said he was in the area visiting a friend. "Thought I would stop by and see how the scene of my greatest courtroom victory was doing," he said with a grin. "Still standing," I said. "Want a burger?" "Absolutely." We sat at a picnic table, and Robert caught me up on his recent cases. He had taken on 2 more HOA abuse cases, both inspired by the publicity from my case. One involved an HOA trying to foreclose on a homeowner for being 2 days late on dues payment. The other involved an HOA banning all political signs, even though state law protected such displays. "You started something," Robert said. "Homeowners are realizing they do not have to be pushed around, and attorneys like me are realizing there is good money in fighting bad HOAs. As long as the homeowners win, I do not care about the motivation," I said. "They are winning." Both cases settled in the homeowners' favor. The HOAs did not want the publicity or the legal fees after seeing what happened here. We talked for a while longer, and then Robert had to leave. As he walked away, I reflected on how much had changed in 3 years. I had gone from a target of fraud to a catalyst for reform. My house, which had once felt threatened, was now a sanctuary. The neighborhood, which had been poisoned by corruption, was now healthy and thriving. The final settlement payment arrived on schedule 5 years after the judgment was entered. I looked at the bank notification on my phone and smiled. $253,000 plus interest, paid in full. Justice delayed but not denied. I thought about writing a letter to Patricia Holloway, telling her that the payments were complete and that I hoped she had learned something from this experience. But I decided against it. She was not part of my life anymore, and I did not need closure from her. I had already gotten everything I needed: vindication, compensation, and the satisfaction of knowing I had fought back and won. Instead, I invited Marcus over for another evening of whiskey on the patio. We toasted to the end of the saga, to fighting back, and to the principle that no one, not even an HOA president, is above the law. "What would you have done differently?" Marcus asked. "Knowing what you know now, would you have handled anything differently?" I thought about it. Maybe I would have acted faster, gotten a lawyer sooner. But honestly, I do not think so. Everything happened the way it needed to happen. If I had backed down, Patricia would still be running her scam. Other people would have been hurt. Sometimes you have to stand up for what is right, even when it is hard and expensive and stressful. "That is a good answer," Marcus said. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over Phoenix. The air was cooling down, that brief perfect window in the desert evening when the temperature is just right. My house stood behind me, solid and secure, with no liens, no fraudulent fines, no threats hanging over it. It was mine, fully and completely, and no one could take that away. The journey from receiving that initial Lien notice to sitting here, years later with everything resolved, had been long and difficult. There had been moments of doubt, moments of anger, moments when I wondered if fighting back was worth the cost. But sitting here now, I knew with absolute certainty that it had been worth every penny, every hour, every ounce of stress. I had learned that justice is not automatic. It has to be fought for, defended, earned. I had learned that institutions like HOAs can be corrupted by individuals who prioritize power and money over their duty to the community. And I had learned that even when the system seems stacked against you, persistence and the truth can win out. The neighborhood association organized a small thank you event for me a few months later. They wanted to acknowledge what I had done and how it had changed the community. I was reluctant at first, not wanting to make a big deal out of it, but Holly Zimmerman talked me into it. "People need to celebrate their heroes," she said. "You are a hero to this neighborhood." The event was held at the community center on a Saturday afternoon. About 50 people showed up, including some of the other homeowners who had been victims of Patricia's fraud. The association president, a retired teacher named William Foster, gave a short speech about how my willingness to fight had saved the neighborhood from continued abuse. Then, to my surprise, he presented me with a plaque. It read, "To Frank Thompson, whose courage and determination freed Meadowbrook Heights from tyranny, with gratitude from your neighbors." I was genuinely moved, which was not something that happened to me often. I thanked everyone, kept my own speech short, and emphasized that they would have done the same thing in my position. But as I looked around the room at the faces of my neighbors, I realized that might not be true. Not everyone had the resources to hire an attorney like Robert Chen. Not everyone had the temperament to endure a years-long legal battle. Not everyone had a friend like Marcus to point them in the right direction. I had been lucky in many ways, and that luck had allowed me to fight back in a way that others could not. That realization solidified my commitment to supporting the legal aid organization that helped homeowners in HOA disputes. Over the years, I continued to donate, and eventually, I joined their board of directors. I wanted to make sure that other people in situations like mine had access to justice, regardless of their financial situation. The organization grew substantially, taking on more cases and winning more often than not. We lobbied for additional reforms to HOA law, both in Arizona and in other states. My story became a case study in their training materials, an example of how one person's willingness to fight back could create ripples that benefited an entire community. 7 years after the lien was first filed, I received an email from a researcher at Arizona State University. She was studying HOA governance and reform, and she wanted to interview me for her dissertation. I agreed, and we met at a coffee shop near the university campus. Dr. Rachel Kim was a sharp, enthusiastic academic who had clearly done her homework. She had copies of all the court filings, transcripts from the criminal trial, and even news articles about the case. "Your case is fascinating because it represents a perfect storm of HOA abuse," she explained. "You had a corrupt president, an ineffective board, inadequate oversight, and homeowners who were either unaware of their rights or too intimidated to assert them. But then you fought back, and the entire system collapsed." "It was not just me," I said. Robert Chen, the attorney, did most of the heavy lifting, and the prosecutor and police detective who pursued the criminal case were crucial. But you were the catalyst. You were the one who said no when everyone else had said yes. That matters. We talked for over 2 hours. Dr. Kim wanted to understand my decision-making process, how I had felt at each stage of the case, and what I thought had changed as a result. I tried to be honest and reflective, acknowledging both the victories and the costs. "You think HOAs are fundamentally flawed?" she asked at one point. "No, I think HOAs serve an important purpose when they are run properly. They maintain common areas, enforce reasonable standards, and create a sense of community. The problem is when they are controlled by people who abuse their power. That is true of any organization, not just HOAs." The key is having checks and balances, transparency, and accountability. And do you think the reforms that have been enacted in Arizona are sufficient? They are a good start. But there is always more that can be done. I think every state should have strong laws protecting homeowner rights, mandatory financial audits for HOAs, and accessible dispute resolution processes. And I think homeowners need to be more engaged. Most people ignore their HOA until there is a problem. But if you are paying dues and living under covenants, you have a responsibility to know what is going on. Dr. Kim's dissertation was published a year later. She sent me a copy, and I was pleased to see that she had treated the case fairly and used it to make broader points about governance and accountability. She even quoted me in the conclusion, which felt surreal. Life continued to move forward. I got a promotion at work, which came with a significant raise. I started dating someone I met at a community event, a nurse named Hannah who had recently moved to Phoenix from California. We bonded over stories of difficult neighbors and bad HOAs. She had her own tale of woe involving a condo association in San Diego that had tried to ban her from parking her motorcycle in her assigned spot. "At least they did not file a fake lien against you," I said. "True. You win the bad HOA competition." Hannah and I got serious quickly. Within a year, we were talking about moving in together. She loved my house, especially the renovations I had made, and she appreciated the low-drama neighborhood environment. "This place has a good vibe," she said one evening as we sat on the patio. "You can tell people actually care about each other, not just about property values." "It took a while to get here," I said. "But yeah, it is a good place now." We got engaged 2 years later. The wedding was small, held in my backyard with close friends and family. Marcus was my best man, and Robert Chen even attended, joking that he wanted to make sure his favorite client was making good life decisions. Hannah and I talked about moving to a bigger house, maybe something with more land outside the city, but we ultimately decided to stay in Meadowbrook Heights. This house had become more than just a building. It was a symbol of standing up for yourself, of fighting back against injustice, of turning a nightmare into a victory. I was not ready to leave that behind. Instead, we renovated further, adding a second story with a master suite and a home office for Hannah. The construction took 6 months and cost more than I wanted to spend, but it was worth it. The house was truly ours now, shaped by our choices and our vision. 10 years after the initial lien was filed, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was an apartment complex in Mesa, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. I opened it carefully, unsure what to expect. The letter was from Patricia Holloway. "Dear Mr. Thompson," it began. "I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you throw this letter away without reading it. But I wanted to tell you that I am sorry for what I did to you and the other homeowners in Meadowbrook Heights. There is no excuse for my actions. I was greedy, and I was arrogant, and I thought I could get away with it. You proved me wrong, and I am grateful that you did. Prison was hard, but it gave me time to think about the person I had become. I have been out for over 6 years now, and I have been working to rebuild my life. I finished paying off the restitution last month, which is why I felt I could finally write this. I do not expect your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused, and I am genuinely sorry." The letter was signed simply, Patricia. I read it 3 times, trying to decide how I felt. There was a part of me that was still angry, that wanted to crumple up the letter and throw it away. But there was another part that recognized the courage it must have taken to write it. I showed the letter to Hannah that evening. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I do not know. Part of me wants to ignore it. Part of me thinks I should respond." "Do you believe she is sincere?" "I think so. I mean, she has paid the restitution. She has done her time. She has nothing to gain from writing this except maybe some peace of mind. Then maybe you should respond, not for her but for you, to close that chapter completely. I thought about it for a few days. Finally, I sat down and wrote a short reply. Patricia, I received your letter. I appreciate that you took the time to write it and to acknowledge the harm you caused. What you did was wrong, and it had real consequences for real people. But I believe in second chances, and I hope you have learned from this experience. I wish you well in rebuilding your life. Frank Thompson. I mailed it and did not expect a response. I never got one, and that was fine. The gesture mattered more than the outcome. As the years continued to pass, the story of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA became something of a legend in Phoenix real estate circles. When people were considering buying a home in an HOA community, they would often ask their real estate agents about board oversight and financial transparency. My case had changed the conversation, making people more aware and more cautious. I eventually retired from my job, having saved and invested wisely over the decades. Hannah and I traveled, spending summers in cooler climates and winters back in Phoenix. We talked about selling the house and moving somewhere new, but we never quite did it. The house held too many memories, too much history. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, I found a box of old documents from the case. Court filings, correspondence with Robert Chen, newspaper clippings. I sat down on the garage floor and went through them, remembering the stress and the anger and the determination that had defined that period of my life. Hannah found me there an hour later, surrounded by papers. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just remembering. Do you want to keep all this?" I looked at the pile of documents. They represented one of the most difficult periods of my life, but also one of the most important. I had stood up for myself and for others. I had fought back and won. That was worth remembering. "Yeah," I said, "I think I do." We boxed everything up carefully and put it in a storage unit. Someday, maybe decades from now, someone might find those documents and learn the story of how one homeowner took on a corrupt HOA and changed an entire community. Or maybe they would just get thrown away. Either way, the story was preserved, a testament to the power of standing up for what is right. As I write this now, more than 15 years after receiving that initial Lien notice, I can say with certainty that fighting back was the right decision. It was not easy and it was not cheap, but it was right. Patricia Holloway tried to steal from me and she ended up in prison. The HOA tried to bully me and it ended up dissolved. Justice was served, not quickly or easily, but thoroughly and completely. The house still stands, a testament to perseverance and principle. The neighborhood thrives, free from the tyranny of a corrupt HOA. And I sleep soundly at night, knowing that when I was tested, I did not back down. I fought back and I won. That is a legacy I can be proud of.